My husband slid the divorce papers across the table and said, "I don't love you. I love your sister. Get out." Ashley smiled behind him like she'd rehearsed it for years. I picked up my 2 kids, packed one bag, and walked out without a word. I didn't cry in front of them. I didn't cry in front of him. I saved that for the parking lot, sitting in a car that still smelled like his cologne, with Lila, 6, asking why Daddy wasn't coming with us, while Finn, barely 5, stayed quiet in his car seat, watching me the way children do when they sense something is wrong before they have words for it. Years later, my sister would show up at my door asking for the one thing I couldn't give her anymore: forgiveness. But to understand why I said no, you have to understand everything I said yes to first. My name is Jasmine. I was 26 when I married Sawyer, and I believed, the way only a young woman deeply in love can believe, that I had found the person who would choose me every single day for the rest of my life. We met at a friend's engagement dinner. He made me laugh so hard I nearly knocked over a glass of wine, and he apologized to the waiter before I even had the chance to. That's who I thought he was. Considerate, steady, mine. We got married 18 months later in a small backyard ceremony because we were saving for a house instead of a big wedding. My sister Ashley was my maid of honor. She gave a toast that made half the guests cry, about how she'd never seen 2 people fit together so easily, how she hoped one day she'd find something like what Sawyer and I had. She'd helped me pick out my dress 2 months earlier, sitting on the floor of the bridal shop dressing room, both of us laughing so hard at one particularly disastrous option that the shop attendant came to check on us twice. I remember hugging her afterward and thinking I was the luckiest woman alive, not just to have Sawyer, but to have a sister who loved me enough to mean every word of that toast. Our daughter Lila came 2 years into the marriage. Our son Finn came 18 months after that. I left my job at a marketing firm to stay home with them, which felt like the right decision at the time, the kind of decision you make together, as a team, without imagining that team could ever quietly become 2 separate people pulling in opposite directions. Those first years of motherhood were exhausting in the ordinary way every new parent understands, but they were also some of the fullest years of my life. Sawyer used to come home and get down on the kitchen floor with Lila, building towers out of blocks just to knock them down and hear her laugh. Every Sunday morning, without fail, he'd make pancakes shaped like whatever animal Lila requested that week, usually lopsided, always eaten with enthusiasm regardless. We had a running joke about his terrible giraffe pancakes that somehow never stopped being funny to either of us. I remember thinking, more than once, that whatever hardship came our way, we would face it as a unit, the same way we'd built everything else. I had no reason yet to think otherwise, and I clung to that certainty the way you cling to anything that has never once let you down. The first crack came on an ordinary Tuesday. I found a receipt in Sawyer's jacket pocket for a dinner at a restaurant across town, dated on a night he told me he was working late. 2 entrees, a shared dessert. I asked him about it, gently, the way you ask a question you're hoping has an innocent answer. He said it was a client dinner, that the client had ordered for both of them, that he'd forgotten to mention it because it wasn't important. I let it go. I wanted to let it go. The second crack came 2 weeks later, when Ashley canceled plans with me at the last minute, citing a work deadline, and then posted a photo later that night from a rooftop bar I recognized because Sawyer had taken me there for our 3rd anniversary. She tagged the location, a small pin beneath the photo that I zoomed in on more times than I'd like to admit. I stared at that photo for a long time before I convinced myself it meant nothing. People go to the same restaurants. Cities aren't that big. I was building excuses for both of them before either of them had even asked me to. There was a third moment, smaller than the other 2, that I only understood the full weight of much later. Our mother hosted a birthday dinner for our father that spring, and Ashley arrived late, flustered, claiming traffic had been unusually bad on a route that, as it turned out, didn't pass anywhere near her apartment. Sawyer arrived 20 minutes after her from a completely different direction, offering the same excuse about traffic on a night when the roads were, by every account, empty. I remember catching my mother's eye across the table for half a second, both of us noticing the same strange coincidence, both of us choosing, out of love for the people involved, to say nothing at all. By the time Lila turned 5, I wasn't sleeping the way I used to. I started noticing small things. Sawyer angling his phone away from me when it buzzed, then setting it face down on the counter a beat too quickly whenever I walked into the room. Ashley growing quiet whenever his name came up in conversation, quiet in a way that felt different from her usual bubbly self, the kind of quiet that comes from someone carefully choosing their words instead of simply speaking. I noticed, and then I told myself I was imagining it, because the alternative was too big to hold. There was one Saturday morning that stayed with me longer than it should have. I'd asked Sawyer to pick up diapers on his way home from what he called an early meeting, and when he walked in 2 hours later than expected, he was freshly showered, in a different shirt than the one he'd left in that morning. He said he'd spilled coffee on himself and swung by the gym to change. It was such a small, forgettable excuse that I almost didn't remember it at all, until months later, when it suddenly made a different kind of sense. The night everything broke open started like any other Sunday. Sawyer came home early for once, which should have felt like a gift. Instead, he asked me to sit down after the kids went to bed. I remember the exact chair I was sitting in. I remember the exact folder he set on the table between us, the papers already filled out, already signed on his side, waiting only for mine. "I don't love you," he said. "I love your sister. Get out." I heard the front door creak before he finished the sentence, and there she was, Ashley, standing in the doorway of my own living room, in my own house, wearing an expression I will never forget for the rest of my life. Not shame, not hesitation, a smile, small, satisfied, like she'd been waiting a long time to finally stop pretending. For a moment, the room went completely silent except for the hum of the refrigerator behind me, and in that silence I found myself doing something strange. I looked, really looked, at the two of them standing there together, and I searched my own chest for the devastation I expected to find. It was there underneath everything, but sitting right beside it was something else entirely. A strange, quiet clarity, as if some part of me had already been packing that bag for months, long before either of them said a word. I stood up, walked upstairs, and packed one bag. I woke Lila and Finn gently, told them we were going on a little adventure, and carried Finn down the stairs while Lila held my hand the whole way to the car. I didn't say a single word to Sawyer or Ashley as I walked past them. There was nothing left to say to two people who had clearly already said everything they needed to say to each other, just never to me. The parking lot of a 24-hour diner is where I finally let myself fall apart once the kids were buckled in and quiet. I gripped the steering wheel and cried the kind of crying that comes from somewhere so deep it doesn't even feel like your own body anymore. Then I wiped my face, looked in the rearview mirror at my daughter's worried eyes, and made myself a promise. Whatever came next, I would build something so solid for these two kids that nothing and no one would ever be able to take it away again. I told Lila the truth that night, in the simplest terms a 6-year-old could hold. I said Mommy and Daddy were going to live in different houses now, that it wasn't anything she or Finn had done, and that both of us still loved them completely. She asked if Aunt Ashley would still come to her birthday. I told her, as gently as I could manage, that things were going to look a little different for a while. She nodded slowly, the way children do when they're absorbing something too big to fully process, and asked if she could still bring her stuffed rabbit to the new house. I told her she could bring anything she wanted. I called our parents from the diner parking lot before I even started driving anywhere. My mother answered on the second ring, and I could hear my father in the background asking who was calling so late. I don't remember exactly what I said, only that I got through the first sentence before my voice broke completely. My mother didn't ask a single question that night beyond where I was and whether the kids had eaten. She simply told me to drive carefully and come straight to their house, and she was standing in the driveway with the porch light on by the time I pulled in an hour later, before I'd even had the chance to explain the rest. I moved into my best friend Renee's guest room for the first 4 months. I filed for divorce the same week I moved out. My lawyer, Diane Foster, told me something I've never forgotten. She said the version of me sitting across from her, exhausted and humiliated, was not the version of me the courts, or my children, or my future would ever see again. She was right. The custody arrangement wasn't a fight, oddly enough. Sawyer told Diane, through his own attorney, that the kids would be better off staying with me, since his sales territory kept him traveling 3 weeks out of every month, and that uprooting them wasn't something he was willing to fight for. He agreed to a structured parenting schedule and monthly support payments, and for the first year, that was the extent of our contact. Diane also suggested I request a full accounting of our joint accounts before finalizing anything, which turned up confirmation of what I already suspected. Sawyer had quietly moved a portion of our shared savings into a separate account in the months leading up to that Sunday dinner. I never pursued anything beyond what the settlement already accounted for. I simply remember sitting in the small mediation room, watching Sawyer sign the final papers without meeting my eyes once, and feeling the last piece of naivety I had left about my marriage quietly settle into place. He hadn't just fallen out of love with me. He'd been preparing an exit for longer than I wanted to admit. I found a small apartment 8 months after leaving, 2 bedrooms, a shared wall with a retired couple who left banana bread on our doormat more times than I can count. There was a stretch that first winter when our heating unit stopped working during a cold snap, and rather than spend money we didn't have on an emergency repair, I bundled both kids into my bed every night for 2 weeks, telling them it was a camping week, so they'd think of it as an adventure instead of a hardship. Lila still brings that up fondly, completely unaware that her mother spent those same nights doing mental math about rent and repair costs long after both kids had fallen asleep against her shoulders. Renee kept an emergency key to that apartment for years, and used it more than once, showing up unannounced with takeout on nights she could tell, just from the tone of a single text message, that I hadn't eaten dinner. My neighbor's grown daughter, Wilhelmina, started as a friendly face at school pickup, and became the person who covered for me on the 2 afternoons a week my new job ran late, waving off every attempt I made to repay her with anything more than gratitude. I think, in the years since, I've come to believe that the family you build out of necessity can mean just as much as the family you're born into, sometimes more, because every person in it chose to stay. That first Christmas alone, I couldn't afford much beyond a small artificial tree and a handful of gifts, and I remember lying awake the night before, dreading the morning, certain the kids would notice everything missing from years past. Instead, Lila and Finn tore through wrapping paper with the same delight they always had, entirely unbothered by the smaller pile beneath the tree, and by afternoon we were building a blanket fort in the living room that took up the entire apartment. I cried once they were asleep that night, not from sadness this time, but from something closer to relief. They were going to be okay. We were going to be okay. Job interviews that first year mostly went nowhere. One interviewer looked at the gap in my resume where my years at home with the kids sat and asked, not unkindly but not gently either, what exactly I'd been doing all that time that would qualify me for the role. I didn't get that job. 6 weeks later, a hiring manager named Odette looked at the same gap and asked me directly what single parenthood had actually taught me. I told her about budgeting on a fraction of what I used to have, negotiating with landlords and school administrators, managing 2 children's entire world without missing a beat that mattered. She hired me that week, and told me months later she'd known within 5 minutes of that conversation that I was exactly who her team needed. 2 years into that job, I pitched a campaign redesign for one of the company's largest retail accounts, the kind of project the senior coordinators usually handled, not someone still relatively new to the team. Odette let me run with it anyway. When the campaign outperformed projections by a wide margin, she promoted me to lead coordinator and gave me my own small team, the first time in years I'd felt recognized for something other than simply surviving. I still remember calling Renee from the parking garage afterward, laughing so hard I could barely get the sentence out. Around the same time, Sawyer's visits started thinning out. A birthday weekend became a phone call from an airport gate, apologetic and rushed, promising to make it up to Finn next time. A planned camping trip got canceled 2 days before. No real explanation offered beyond something came up. I remember Finn's 6th birthday most clearly because he'd asked, unprompted, if Daddy was coming to his party this year, and I'd said yes, because Sawyer had confirmed it the week before. Sawyer texted 40 minutes before the party started. saying a work call had run long and he'd try to swing by for cake. He never showed. Finn spent the rest of the afternoon glancing at the front door every few minutes, and by the time the last guest left, he'd stopped looking entirely. By the time Finn turned 8, the scheduled weekend visits had thinned to once a month, then once every few months, until they became something Sawyer rescheduled. So often the kids stopped mentioning them at all. I remember one exchange in a parking lot where Sawyer arrived 20 minutes late, distracted, checking his phone twice while Finn tried to tell him about a school project. He nodded along without really listening, the same way he used to nod along with me in the last stretch of our marriage, and I remember thinking, watching from my car, that some people don't change the pattern, they just find new people to run it on. I never said a word against Sawyer in front of the kids, but I watched Finn stop asking when Daddy was coming, the way children do when they've quietly learned not to expect an answer. It was a slower kind of loss than the one from that Sunday night, but it was a loss all the same, and I think it taught both my children, earlier than I would have liked, exactly which adults in their lives they could count on. I met Grant about a year and a half after the divorce, through a parent carpool group at Lila's school. He was a single father himself, raising his son Micah after losing his wife to illness years earlier. Our first real conversation happened over burnt coffee in the school parking lot while we both waited out a delayed pickup, and it turned into a habit neither of us planned. Two exhausted parents comparing notes on lunches and homework, and the particular loneliness of doing it all without a partner. It was almost a year before either of us called it anything other than friendship, and I've come to think that slowness was exactly what made it real. Our first actual date was almost accidental. Micah had a school science fair the same weekend as Lila's, and after both presentations ran long, Grant suggested the four of us grab pizza together rather than parting ways, so nobody has to cook. Somewhere between Finn stealing pepperoni off Micah's slice and Lila explaining her volcano project in exhaustive detail, I remember looking across the table at Grant and feeling something I hadn't let myself feel in years, the simple relief of not doing the hard parts of parenting entirely alone. We started seeing each other properly after that, slowly, around school pickups and soccer practices, never rushing the kids into anything they weren't ready for. Grant never once made me feel like an obligation or a rescue project. He simply showed up, consistently, remembering Finn's favorite snack, sitting through Lila's entire dance recital without checking his phone once, asking me at the end of long days not what was wrong, but what had gone right. By the time he proposed, 2 years into knowing each other, Lila and Finn had long since started calling him by name without any prompting from me, and Micah had already started including them, unasked, whenever he talked about my brother and my sister to his own friends. We got married 3 years after my divorce finalized, in a small ceremony in my backyard, the same yard where I taught both kids to ride their bikes, strung with string lights. Grant and Micah had spent an entire Saturday hanging. Lila, 10 by then, asked to be the one to walk me down the makeshift aisle, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers she'd insisted on picking herself that morning. Finn, 9, gave a toast so sincere and unpolished that half the guests were in tears before he even finished his first sentence, thanking Grant for teaching him how to ride a bike and never once making him feel like an afterthought. Micah, 14, asked, half joking and half serious, if he could officially call Lila and Finn his siblings from that day forward. Nobody handed me that family. I built it, one unglamorous decision at a time, and there is a particular kind of pride that comes from knowing exactly what something cost you to create. The first year of blending our households wasn't seamless, and I don't want to pretend it was. Finn and Micah butted heads more than once over whose turn it was for the television, and Lila went through a few quiet months where she seemed to be testing whether Grant's patience had limits the way she'd once watched her father's patience run out. Grant never rose to it. He'd sit with her after school some afternoons, not pushing her to talk, just present, until eventually she came to him instead of the other way around. By the time Lila turned 11, she was the one asking Grant to help her practice her multiplication tables, the same tables her father had once promised, and failed, to help her with the year before. Meanwhile, Ashley and Sawyer's relationship, the one built on the foundation of my old life, was apparently not built on anything sturdier than what it had taken from me. They married about a year after my divorce finalized, in a ceremony I wasn't invited to and wouldn't have attended regardless. What I later learned is that the same instincts that led Sawyer to walk away from one marriage didn't disappear once he was in another one. Ashley started noticing the late nights, the vague explanations, the distance that crept into their marriage the way it had once crept into mine. Except this time she had no sister to blame it on, no easy villain to point to. Our mother told me the marriage unraveled over almost 2 years rather than all at once. Ashley had tried to hold things together, rearranging her own schedule around Sawyer's disappearing hours, repeating the same excuses about client dinners, and demanding bosses that I had once repeated myself, word for word, as if Sawyer had simply pulled the same script out of a drawer and used it twice. Our mother mentioned one Thanksgiving, about 2 years into their marriage, when Ashley had snapped at Sawyer in front of the whole family over a canceled anniversary dinner, then immediately apologized and blamed her own stress, the exact kind of quiet self-correction I remember doing myself for years without ever noticing I was doing it. Our mother later told me how, just under 4 years into the marriage, Ashley finally confirmed what she'd suspected for months. She found a hotel receipt in the pocket of Sawyer's jacket, the same jacket our mother pointed out without meaning anything by it, that he'd worn for years. Ashley confronted him that same night, and instead of denying it, Sawyer simply admitted the affair had been going on for several months, almost matter-of-fact about it, the way a person confesses to something they've already emotionally left behind. Ashley filed for divorce within the month. I found a strange, sad symmetry in that detail when I heard it, the same jacket pocket, a different sister, the same quiet unraveling. I found out later that the divorce cost Ashley more than the marriage itself. She'd left a stable position at a marketing agency 2 years into their relationship, at Sawyer's suggestion, to help manage the rental properties he'd started acquiring. When the marriage ended, she found herself without the professional footing she'd once had, in a job market that had shifted considerably since she'd last been in it, and moved back in with our parents for several months. Our mother mentioned, carefully and without much detail, that Ashley had gone on a string of interviews that first year without much success, the same kind of quiet rejection I remembered from my own early months, except she was navigating it without small children giving her a reason to get out of bed every morning, and without the sister she used to lean on, because she'd made sure that sister was the one person she could no longer call. What I did feel, when I heard all this, wasn't satisfaction. It was something quieter, a tired confirmation that some patterns don't change just because the person on the receiving end does. About a year after her own divorce finalized, Ashley showed up at my door. I remember the exact moment I opened it and saw her standing there, thinner than I remembered, holding nothing in her hands, as if she'd walked there without giving herself time to think better of it. "I know I don't deserve this conversation," she said, before I'd even said hello. But I needed to say it in person. "I'm sorry, Jasmine. I've been sorry for years." I let her stand on my porch for a long moment before I responded. Then I told her the truth as plainly as I could. "I spent years rebuilding everything you and Sawyer tried to take from me," I said. "My kids grew up watching me work through it, so they wouldn't feel what I felt that night. I'm not angry anymore, Ashley, genuinely. But not being angry doesn't mean I owe you a place back in my life. Some doors don't reopen just because the person who closed them finally feels bad about it." She cried, apologized once more, told me she thought about Lila and Finn constantly, and understood if I never forgave her. I told her, gently but firmly, that I wished her well in whatever came next, but that our relationship as sisters had ended the night she stood in my living room smiling while my marriage fell apart. Forgiveness, I told her, wasn't something I was withholding to punish her. It simply wasn't something that could rebuild trust broken that completely. She left quietly. I heard, through our mother, that she moved to a different state the following year, closer to an old college friend,